I'm prone to getting into Facebook arguments. I'm also prone to talking about race a lot. A couple of months ago, both of these hobbies of mine seemed to meet right at the center. Got into an argument with a former high school friend of mine and her husband and another high school friend of mine about race. Granted, it all started because I made a mistake in judgment. However, what then followed was a discussion on race, rather an argument on race, that kind of followed me into my inbox. As it turns out, this particular former friend of mine is a white woman who is married to a black man. At one instance in the conversation, I mentioned that she was raising black kids. She then refuted me and said something along the lines that she was raising her kids to not see color. I told her she was raising her kids incorrectly. This was a mistake on my part. There was probably a better way to say that gingerly or to actually convey a point across. However, ever since that conversation, I have felt an itch that I can't scratch with regards to interracial dating and biracial children. As someone who has dated interracially before, I've dated outside my race, I've dated inside my race, what have you. Never more than now have I ever considered how dating someone outside of my race may eventually have bearing on how my children are raised or how I raise my children. When I think about biracial children, especially when one of the parents is black, I always consider that the experience that the child is going to have is going to be on some level a black experience. And I guess my real question is, how do white people reconcile a black experience when they have never had that for themselves? How do they reconcile this experience for their children who are at least partially black? The other part of this that gets me is the fact that raising children without a race on some level seems disingenuous to the child themselves. To be honest, I guess one of the theories or things that I'm positing, hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, it seems like on some level, there seems to be of note that the child, while not being 100% black, is also not white. And the not whiteness outweighs their not blackness. Typically all over the world, but especially in America, if a child looks black, they are treated as black. This is something that I can't empirically say is true. I know that in America we have the one drop rule, and I know there's some sort of parameter to this. Case in point, I always talk about Halle Berry and Mariah Carey. Both of these women have white mothers. However, I don't think any of us would ever consider Mariah Carey to be black. However, you look on the other side at Halle Berry, she also has a white mother. She also had a white mother who told her daughter that she was black when she was a child. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone who wouldn't consider Halle Berry to be black. I think you go the same thing with Barack Obama. I actually had this argument with a white woman shortly after he was elected, and she said to me, "What do you consider Barack Obama to be?" I said, "I consider him to be black." She responded to me and says, "He's not, he's biracial." And I said, "Yes, but when I look at him, he looks black." I think most of what we deal with when we're talking about biracial children, biracial people, is that people are going to treat you at face value. If that's not the case, then you wonder why people are intimidated by black men. People make assumptions about black women. This is all on sight. Clearly, there's something to assumptions and stereotypes across all races. My guest today has insight into this. Let me allow him to introduce himself and talk a little bit about this.
I'm Alex Vaccarino. I'm half Puerto Rican and half white, specifically Italian and Irish. And so that's really been my issue, and I think is the issue for anyone that is biracial to some degree, particularly when you are half white, but you don't look white. And if your experience growing up was in by any reasonable standard white, when you come to that realization that no white person sees you as a white person, sees you as something different, not necessarily hostile toward you, but doesn't a particular opinion of you that flies in the face of this inherent notion that you have that you are part of their culture. So when you can't turn to that white side that you feel most comfortable and you want to look elsewhere, or at least in my case, I wanted to look toward possibly my Hispanic side, I didn't have the roots with which to make that part of my identity or experience in any meaningful way, or at least I haven't been able to do that yet. But I do consider it a valuable step to understanding or forging my own identity, which is what I think biracial people in this country, or maybe everywhere, have to do, is just forging your own identity. And not, I'd rather be confused now than living under false pretenses like I feel that I was.
What I'm positing in this next couple of episodes, I really don't have an answer. And this is kind of look at me searching for answers through the people that I'm going to interview over the course of the next few episodes, and kind of coming to a conclusion. I'll come to the same conclusion as y'all after I listen to all the footage. I'll come to a conclusion at the end. I doubt that it's going to be definitive, and it may not even be satisfying. But I think at some point we're going to be able to have a clearer understanding of at least what interracial couples are thinking, what white parents of biracial children are thinking, what black parents of biracial children are thinking, what black parents think when they raise black children, what white parents think when they raise white children, and most of all, what biracial people think of themselves, what type of identity they have growing up as adults. It's going to be a lot. So for those of you that don't want to talk about race or don't want to hear about race, I don't blame you for checking out, but I would invite you to listen anyway, because you might learn something along the way too. Now, I know that was a long prologue, but with that, let's start. That was a 6-minute introduction. I don't really think I have time to do this. Just do it. Welcome to another exciting episode of Time Well Spent with Ronald, the podcast nobody asked for, yet somebody is listening to. Let's get right to it. Based on the prologue, I'm pretty sure you already understand the premise of this episode and the premise of this series. What I'm going to play for you next is an interview with my friend Alex. Alex is biracial, as he stated before. He is a quarter Irish, a quarter Italian, and half Puerto Rican. For the majority of this series, we're going to be speaking about being biracial in terms of being mixed with black and white. However, in this case, I think that Alex had some really good insight to the discussion about being biracial in general. Typically in this country, we tend to have a very narrow view of what being biracial means, but we hopefully will get to that later in the series. I talked with Alex for about 30 minutes, so this was a pretty dense interview. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you right now. However, as this series continues, you might hear me reference it once again. Being biracial for you has been kind of a growing experience. And you talked about, first of all, your relationship to race growing up was a little unusual because growing up, you said you always thought that you were white.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, I thought of myself as white. I knew that I wasn't entirely white and that I didn't look white, but it really didn't affect the way that I viewed myself on a day-to-day basis in terms of the way that I interacted with the people around me. I thought it was just like this secondary thing that didn't really affect my life and didn't affect anyone's perception of me. And there were a few incidents throughout my childhood that I may or may not have picked up on at the time that flew in the face of that and ultimately led to me realizing that that is not true. But yeah, up until about, I'd say maybe a few years ago, I thought of myself culturally, I guess, as white, which is a weird way to describe whiteness, but I do think it's a culture, and it's giving it too much credit to just call it the default.
Talk a little bit about how you mentioned that your relationship to whiteness changed the more you were listening to rap.
So I actually actively avoided rap growing up, I think, because of the stereotypes surrounding it, that, you know, my parents, it's all garbage and profanity, and there really was no understanding from anyone else around me about, you know, what rap is, where it came from, why it is the way that it is. And towards the end of college, I started to listen to a lot of it, and specifically, you know, dipped my toes in at first listening to Eminem, and then started to listen.
That's a good segue from whiteness into rap.
Yeah. So then I started to listen to more black artists and older artists, and that had a big effect on just my understanding of what it meant to be black in this country. Not even, it wasn't an immediate identity issue for me so much as it was coming to understand why there were so many claims of discrimination that I took about as seriously as any average white person would, which is to say, oh, that used to be a thing. It's not a thing now. And it really dispelled that for me, dispelled that notion. Specifically listening to Tupac gave me more clarity into how it feels to be in a black man in America. And obviously I can't understand that fully, but it equipped me with the necessary tools to be empathetic as I can be without actually having the experience myself. And eventually that led me to thinking about the way in which this revelation can apply to my own life and the way that people are interacting around me. Because I know that at one point or another, as I just said, believe that there wasn't really any sort of real discrimination going on anymore, and that the best way to think about things is everybody's the same, be colorblind, and racism isn't a problem. But eventually I came to understand that that is just fundamentally untrue. The way that people interact with you is inherently based on their physical perception of you. And while the people that I grew up with that were under the same delusions that I was, those people mostly being white, while they had the luxury of continuing to go on that notion that, race isn't really a problem in terms of discrimination, I couldn't, because I started to notice these things that were happening to me throughout my life, and how it wasn't okay. It wasn't just like a normal thing. It would always seem like it was my race was like, maybe if it ever came up, was like the butt of a joke, like I'm Hispanic, but I would never really be called Puerto Rican. It would be like, oh, Alex is Mexican. Oh, somebody made a joke about Mexicans, so is Alex offended, or like just like that very idiotic, closed-minded white position. Yeah, sorry, kind of lost my train of thought there.
No, and you were going. So talk a little bit about, so you are actually closing in on your identity.
Yeah.
And how you went from being empathetic with Black struggle to turning the mirror inward on how you feel about your own identity.
Yeah, so I think the reason that it took so long for me to be able to apply this to myself is because I never, as much as I was exposed to Puerto Rican culture growing up, it wasn't something that I ever felt like I was a part of. I felt pretty disconnected from my earliest memories up till the present day, pretty disconnected from that half of my family. And it's not necessarily the fault of them or of me, just that it always felt separate. I knew that's where I came from, where my mother came from, but I never felt included in that. And I did, to some extent, feel included with the white side of my family and the friends that I had and the other people in my life. And so it was hard for me to reach a point where I considered myself different from those people with which I felt I had the most in common, at least in terms of experience.
Do you feel that this would have been any different had your parents pushed you in one direction or the other with regards to race, or if at least they had a more open conversation with you about race?
I think that it would have been different had they spoken with me a little bit more about this, but at the same time, I do feel that I was pushed in a direction. I was just pushed in a direction that I could never ultimately find fulfilling. I think I was pushed towards the whiteness in my family, and I don't want to give the impression that I feel like like my childhood and these relationships I forged in family and friends and otherwise are not as meaningful because of the identity ambiguity that I experience. But it is, I think, it did ultimately do me a disservice because I couldn't. There was no way for that road to lead me anywhere that was going to be fulfilling for myself. That road being believing that I was white.
As I stated before, Alex brought a lot of insight in this interview. Next week, we'll continue with another portion of this interview. We have a long way to go in continuing our discussions about being biracial. Time Well Spent with Ronald is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios. Creative support from Michael Ulysses Jefferson and Benjamin Schallenberger. Theme music provided by royalty-free music from Ben Sound. Outro music provided by Michael Corte. Special thanks to Alex Vaccarino and Benjamin Schallenberger. Time Well Spent will return in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. If you like my outro music, I got it from a piece of music called Gaga for Rent, which was created and produced by Michael Corte. If you look at it, it is an overture of the songs from Rent mixed together with Lady Gaga's popular songs. Jump on my website, ohitsbigron.com, and you'll see Gaga for Rent embedded there with this episode of the podcast. So go check that out. And again, thank you, Michael Corte, for allowing me to use your music. And here's a sample from that piece. Gaga for Rent.
I'm your biggest fan. I'll follow you until you love me. Papa, paparazzi. Baby, there's no other superstar you know that I'll be. Papa, paparazzi. Promise I'll be kind, but I won't stop until that boy is mine. Baby, I'll be famous, chase you down until you left me. Papa, paparazzi. I should tell you. Whoop, whoop.
I think they meant it when they said you can't buy love. Now I know you can rent it. A new lease, you are my love. On life, be my life.
Take me for what I am, who I was meant to be. And if you give a damn, take me, baby. Take me, baby.
We're just asking the world to get deep.
Welcome to another exciting episode of 10 Minutes with Ron. Oh, crap. That's not the name of this show.